Hello everybody, welcome back for another video. Hope you're all doing well and that you're all having a great day. We have a question from a viewer. It says, and I do quote, "Would be interested to hear your thoughts on renting versus buying a property. So many people believe you should stretch yourself to buy your first home. I think personally you're better off renting and instead use that capital to invest in properties to rent out." End quote. I'll give you as much of my mind as I possibly can. On an unscripted kind of basis, simply because I think it's a very important topic for a lot of people. I think a lot of young people, or people in general, but especially young people, are usually pushed into the corner or the idea of that by the time you're 21, you should have your own property. By the time you're 25, you should be married and have about 3 or 4 properties, or you should have a big house and all these other things that we are told that we should have. And I think a lot of that comes from, not from a bad place necessarily, but I think a huge portion of it comes from this world that we used to live in when our parents were younger, or even our grandparents were maybe our age. The idea that you had to get married and then you had to buy a 2 or 3 bedroom house no longer really stands, because the world in the last 60 or so years and even the last year have changed completely dramatically. I do think that it is important in its own way that everyone owns a property. It doesn't have to be the property that you are currently living in, but I think the idea of owning property as a way to make passive income is great. And I think that everyone should strive for this in some sort of way. I do not think that we should be stretched out, or that the first place that you have to buy has to be a 19-bedroom Oprah-sized mansion. And I mentioned this before in one of my earlier videos. My original process for when I was buying things is that I made sure to only buy studios. This was very important for me because I was finding studios that were a lot less expensive and they were easier for me to be able to acquire, especially without having to go into debt, because I had saved up for years before and I was investing in different ways, yada, yada, yada. And I was able to push this money into that. I do think it is a mistake for people to think that because they are a certain age, that they should own property, it has to be a certain size property, that they have to get a mortgage, that they are required in some sort of societal way to have to follow what everyone else is doing. And on the rental part, I would love if people just were able to simply rent, but I think a lot of people end up buying because rents keep rising. I mentioned this before in another video very briefly. What we have right now is a situation where there are tons of rich people who are figuring out that living is a right. And I say it that way as far as they realize that people, I have to sneeze. Sorry. They realize that people need to live somewhere. So they're making sure to capitalize on the idea of, let me buy as many properties as possible so that people have to end up paying me. With the lack of regulation, and that's also a touchy topic because I personally feel in a sort of way that owners shouldn't be told what they can or cannot rent their place out for. However, there is a limit. If you're renting out a studio for $4,000, knowing that you're taking advantage of people, I guess it's more of a moral ethic question kind of at that point. So I feel like people have been buying or trying to put themselves in a position where they can buy simply because they see rents rising, and they either want to be out of the game forever and simply have a place where they can live and they only have to pay their land fee or their HOA fee, or simply because they want to do it themselves. They see that person's paying $1,800 for garbage. I can get something similar and charge somebody else $2,000, and it kind of puts everyone into this really weird loop. The cost of living in many cities is rising, is going to continue rising as it is expected. I don't know if you've seen the charts before, that by the year 2050, a large portion of the Earth's population will just live inside of major cities. Because this is where the job opportunities will be, this is where the parties, the clubs, other single people. And it's kind of a way for everyone to come together in a very, you understand what I'm saying. This is kind of the idea, at least, for all of that. But I think a lot of the reality of the situation is, unless we end up going to a deflationary Bitcoin world, and if you know what I'm talking about, you know what I'm talking about, is that people are pushing forward and are going to continue pushing forward to be able to try and buy as much as possible, or when they can, or even stretching themselves, which is also a very big mistake. Because I think the last thing that everyone needs, the very last thing, is to be in debt, and to also be in debt to anyone or to something or to a company or corporation for the next 30 years. I don't think it's absolutely right. If, however, and I will say this, if you are looking to get a mortgage, I would implore you to try and get one that has a fixed rate, that has very favorable terms for you. And it's weird for me. I'm looking down like a dog who's ashamed, because I don't promote mortgages. I know that they're great. I know that people love them. I know that people have a thing between the 15 and 30-year mortgages, etc., etc. But I don't think it's right to tell people that it's okay to get into debt, because you never know what situation someone's in. You never know how good they are at paying off that debt, if their job is stable or will be there for the next 30 years to be able to make the income to be able to pay off the mortgage, or just in general. I think I've seen other YouTubers telling people, oh no, it's totally fine. 30-year mortgages are great. And it's like, you're also making like $800,000 a year from YouTube and your other properties. So it's very easy for you to say, to get a mortgage that you have to pay $2,000 for, but for someone else, a $2,000 mortgage may be completely out of their league, but you're pushing them to go into that direction. What I have seen recently, and I'm glad that this is happening, it's not so much the tiny home kind of movement. It's more of a people moving away from bigger cities and or moving into the suburbs and or moving into just smaller cities in general, so that they are able to get onto the property ladder without it having to break the bank. There's a couple pages on Instagram. I think I'm getting it because the algorithms have realized what I like to look at. One of them is called like cheap EU properties. And when you start clicking on that one, you'll see all the other ones popping up really fast. They're interesting because these Instagrams are made for to show you cheap properties around Europe. There's also one for South America. There's one for the States. There's one for everywhere. To show you these cheap properties, to let you know that there's an alternative to be able to having to buy inside of a big city. I think it's great, the idea of really buying your own place, having your own place. It also gives you security and complete peace of mind. But there's a huge difference between you buying an $800,000 two-bedroom somewhere as opposed to a $74,000 home because you had to live an hour and a half away. Like, is the status that important to you to be able to tell people that I own this place that I can barely afford in New York City, as opposed to saying I live an hour and a half away and my house is a 3 or 4 bedroom, I have a backyard and a pool, it was $74,000, needed some fixing up, but my mortgage is only about $350 per month. It's kind of these things that people have to kind of look for. I think we live in a society, I don't even think, we live in a society where people are told that you need something newer, brighter, bigger, stronger, amazinger than what everyone else kind of has. If you've ever watched a documentary on credit card debt or personal debt, please do so. I don't enjoy them. I'm not like eating popcorn like, ooh, she's in debt. But it's more like it reinforces in my mind what I already know and what I try to send to other people to tell them, like, you don't have to live this way. You don't have to be in debt. You don't have to make sure that you're living up to the standards of everyone else just so that you can't pay your own bills. Because on top of the mortgage, you have HOA fees, you have light, you have gas, you have electricity, you have water, you have food, you have transport. So all these things add up very quick. Yeah. I think I answered your question more or less. I also think people would be better off renting, but I don't think currently that that's the most realistic option for a lot of people. Not the keeping up with the Joneses thing, but more of a, if rents are going to continue to rise, I think that mentally people will move towards the area of, I need to accumulate something to be able to avoid the risk of having to pay more rent before. Like, I know a lot of people who are paying $1,200 in rent. Their rent is now like $2,150 because the last like 10 years, prices have been rising so quick. Bigger cities have had more people inside of them. Yeah, I do agree with you. I think renting is better. People also have that kind of hang up where the money that I'm paying my rent for or to could also be just going equivalently to a mortgage. If you are able to do this, that's absolutely fantastic. If you find yourself paying $1,200, $1,300, especially, and I say this if you're single. If you have a spouse and if you have kids, please don't put your family in the precarious situation of you deciding that you want to get rid of the current apartment that you're living in to try and go on an adventure and buy a house, putting your family at risk of potentially being on the street. I don't say that as a joke, but I've heard that too many times on these documentaries, so please just watch out. If you are single and are currently in the situation where your rent is around $1,200 and you have saved up enough money to be able to get a mortgage with a fixed rate over the course of a 15-year period so your numbers aren't fluctuating, and your mortgage comes out to $700-800 per month, then yeah, it's a bit more advantageous because you would be paying rent already. You're not going to be paying rent. You have to pay rent to someone so that you can live somewhere. If you're going to be paying $1,200, why not pay the $800? As long as you can get that $800 locked in. Because realistically, if you get that fixed rate and you're paying $800 and inflation keeps going up and your number's still $800 and the $1,200 you would have been paying before goes up to $1,300, $1,400, $1,650, you're still paying $800. But there are certain ways that you have to make sure that you're going to acquire the property to make sure that you aren't, and I say this in the nicest way, that you're not screwing yourself over should you decide to get a mortgage. So I hope I answered your question. I would love if everyone could simply rent and had cheaper rents. Even though I'm a property owner, I don't like the stress that people have to go through. I mentioned this before, whatever. I don't think I have to say it. The point is, what was I saying? Yes, I would love a world where everyone could rent cheaper and didn't have to worry about keeping up with the Joneses. I think it's also important that everyone owns their own something in some sort of way. But if you decide to go on the course of buying a home or something, just make sure you have the money. Please do not go for a 100% mortgage or an 80% mortgage. Make sure you have a competent bank and make sure you have a fixed rate mortgage and that someone's not trying to subprime you. I do hope you all enjoyed. I hope you all are having a great day, a great morning, great afternoon, great evening, wherever you are, wherever you might be. I do hope it's absolutely fantastic. If you happen to have any other questions, don't be afraid to ask me. I love answering questions. Thank you all once again for watching and listening, and I will most certainly be talking to you all soon. See you.